again, I want to clarify some things on here in our definitions for this thing. Is I want to make sure you know what I mean by, I'm going to ask another question, is I'm going to give you a dimension in terms such as elements or positions. Alright, if I ask for a position, elements, or things like that, make sure you count by the index. Okay, so things such as index of an array, you start counting. You start counting. Count with zeros. Okay, count with 0. So for instance, if I have these sets of arrays that I'm about to give you, inside of this thing you start, this is 0. These are all indexed. You think of it as a subscript. So for example, if I gave you something like an int, an array size of sample, right? And I could do something like this, and I could ask you, for example, what if I have an array size of 10? That's size. So you start counting, 10 is the size. But if I ask you what's the range, you would actually do what? It's actually from 0 to 9. Okay? That's the range. So make sure you get the terminology right with this thing. I'm going to give you an array size. By definition, arrays all starts with the definitions. They all start with 0. So start counting with 0. You can't change that definition for me, okay? Alright. I will give you an array size and we'll ask you. There's going to be, I've been counting, there's a couple of questions on here. Alright. The next part is, come down and look at page 552. 552 is about string copy. Alright, and I did a lot of these things on the videos with it. Look at that table 8-1 for me. Alright, I'm going to see if I could find a string copy in this thing. Table 8-1. Let's look at the string copy of that. Here, this is what I'm looking for. This is what I'm looking for right here. So in this table, I need for you to understand the string copy, S1, S2, how this is, how, when, you know, remember we did some of the sample problems with it. I'm going to give you a length of a string. I'm going to give you a length of a string. I want to ask you what is the parameter inside for S1 and S2. Make sure you be able to do this. I did this in the homework problem for you. Okay, that's one. The next one is, I need for you to know, let's see if I can find this thing. On top of page 560 in my book with it, I need for you to know, if I gave you an array of a data type of two-dimensional with this, and I'm going to ask you what is the if you have a two-dimensional array, all right, take the figure two-dimensional array on sales on page 561, for example. All right, let me do this. Two-dimensional array. Let's call this thing on sales. Okay. Let's take, for example, this one right here. This is a good one to use. So we have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 columns. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. There's 6 rows and 5 columns. So row is always what you're going to read first, right? So there are 6 rows and 5 columns. If I ask you what is the dimension for this, it's a row is going to be what? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. 6 by 5. You always say the row first and then the columns. Okay? This is a 6 by 5. This 10 in here, the first upper left hand corner, where the GM in the red, the position is 0, 0. This position is what? Row 0, column 1. Row 0, column 2. Row 0, column 3. That's the index. That's how you access this. Look at this next row. Row 1, column 0. 1, comma 0. That's how you write the subscripts for this number 18. So that's how you want. I want to talk to you about that, because this dimensional, this array, the following this dimension, you just take this grid and you multiply it by, if this is a 6 row by 5 column, then there is what? There's how many components? 6 times 5 is 30 components, right? So I want to ask you, how many components in a particular array when I give you a dimensional array, all right? So make sure you understand how that works with it. The next part is I need for you to know how to do sum by row. Remember now, when you sum by row, all right, this is on, for me, it's on page 567. When you sum by row, you have to take the number of column. First of all, anytime you add a sum, you have to have a base. So in this case, the sum by row is going to have to initialize the sum by 0. Here's this 0 in this equation. This starts with 0. You will increment the number of column. If you want to add the row, you add up the column, and you start with the base of the sum is 0. You get it? If you add the column, then you need to add the individual row. Does that make sense? So make sure you understand how to do that, because I'm going to give you a particular dimension, and then I want to ask you is to find the sum of the element of a certain row, 4th row, 3rd row, 5th row, and how would you find that sum? What is the algorithm that you would actually write to actually find this? Okay, so understand that when you're adding a row, you have to add each of the column. If you're adding each of the sum of the column, then you have to add each of the row. Okay, so it's the other way around with this. And if you look at this right here with it, you know, this is an example of how you can add a row. Right? This is a row right here, right? So this is a constant number right here with a matrix of 4, and which is remaining fixed with this. So you're adding the column to get the row. Okay, you're adding the column to get the row. Make sure you know how to do that. Again, I asked you, one of the things is, you know, that was the sum by row. Now you gotta know how to do sum by column. So if you're adding the sum of the column, you have to add the individual row. Okay, so this matrices, that when you add across the matrices with this thing, you gotta take the sum of each one of the row that you add to it. And again, there has to be, the sum has to be initialized to 0, so you can add it with it. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to give you a dimension of an array. I'm going to ask you, which one do I add to get the sum of the row and sum of the columns with this thing? Understand this algorithm for me. Understand this algorithm for me. All right. If you're adding the sum of the row, then you have to add each of the column. If you're adding the sum of the column, then you have to add each of the row. Okay. So that's if you keep that straight, you'll be okay.